When she said she'd teach them how to run, they laughed. "What could a girl like you possibly know about pushing limits?" they said. But when her pant leg rolled up during warm-up, the entire gym fell silent. This is how Sarah's story began. The 28-year-old woman seemed like just another ordinary fitness trainer walking through the glass doors of Elite Performance Gym that crisp Monday morning in downtown Los Angeles. She had just started working at the city's most prestigious fitness center, a gleaming facility where Hollywood celebrities and professional athletes came to train. The gym's marble floors reflected the California sunshine streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, and the air hummed with the sound of high-end equipment and ambitious dreams. Sarah had a slight limp that she tried to hide, and she always wore long black track pants regardless of the weather. Her colleagues had already formed opinions about her during her first week. "She seems nice enough," whispered Jessica, the yoga instructor, "but she's so quiet, almost fragile." The other trainers, mostly young men with bulging biceps and confident swagger, considered her soft, not quite elite performance material. That Monday morning would change everything. Sarah entered Studio B for her first group running class, clipboard in hand, heart pounding with nervous energy. She faced 12 people, but the room felt dominated by 3 particular individuals who sat in the front row with arms crossed and skeptical expressions. Jake Martinez was a 24-year-old bodybuilder from Venice Beach. At 6 feet 2 inches with perfectly sculpted muscles and a cocky grin, he was used to being the alpha in any fitness setting. He leaned over to his workout buddy and whispered loudly enough for others to hear, "Dude, I've been running competitively for 10 years. I ran track at USC. What could this girl possibly teach me that I don't already know?" Mike Thompson, a 32-year-old former college football player, sat beside Jake with his massive frame taking up 2 chairs. His glory days at UCLA were behind him, but his ego remained intact. He looked Sarah up and down dismissively and announced to the group, "This is our trainer?" "Seriously? My 12-year-old daughter runs faster than her in our neighborhood 5Ks. I came here expecting elite coaching, not this." Brad Wilson, 26, was the CrossFit enthusiast who never missed an opportunity to mention his latest WOD or his box's leaderboard rankings. His eyes focused on Sarah's slight limp as she walked to the front of the room. "Look at her," he said with a smirk. "She's actually limping. How is someone who can barely walk properly going to teach us about running performance? Can she even keep up with our warm-up pace?" The energy in the room shifted as other group members began to murmur and exchange glances. Sarah felt the weight of their judgment, but she had faced worse, much worse. She cleared her throat and began speaking in a calm, measured voice that carried surprising authority. "Good morning, everyone. My name is Sarah Chen, and starting today, I'll be your running coach. I know some of you might have questions about my qualifications." Snickers and barely suppressed laughter rippled through the group. Jake rolled his eyes dramatically. Mike shook his head in disbelief. Brad pulled out his phone, probably texting his CrossFit buddies about this joke of a situation. Sarah continued, her voice steady despite the obvious disrespect. "I understand that first impressions matter in this business. I also understand that you're all here because you want to improve your performance, push your limits, and achieve goals you never thought possible." Jake couldn't contain himself any longer. He stood up, his 220-pound frame towering over Sarah's modest 5 feet 4 inches stature. "Okay, I'm sorry, but I have to say something. Are you seriously going to stand there and tell us, serious athletes who've been training for years, how to run? I mean, look at yourself. You're limping. You look like you've never seen the inside of a real gym, and frankly, you seem more suited for teaching senior citizen water aerobics than coaching elite runners." The room erupted in laughter. Mike high-fived Jake and added his own commentary. "Exactly. We're looking for performance enhancement, cutting-edge techniques, maybe some insights from someone who's actually competed at a high level. No offense, but maybe you should start with the beginner groups and work your way up. This is clearly above your pay grade." Brad delivered the final blow with surgical precision. "Look, Sarah, I don't want to be completely disrespectful here, but honestly, you should probably focus on learning to run properly yourself before you try to teach others. I mean, That limp isn't exactly inspiring confidence in your athletic abilities. Maybe consider a different career path? The entire group dissolved into laughter and side conversations. Several people were already gathering their belongings, clearly planning to request a different instructor. Sarah's face flushed red, but something in her eyes remained unshakable, a quiet steel that none of them recognized. She had heard worse. She had survived worse, and she was about to show them exactly what they were dealing with. As they began their warm-up routine, Sarah led them through a series of dynamic stretches. During one particular movement, a high knee lift, her right pant leg rode up slightly, exposing her lower leg for just a moment. Brad, who was directly behind her, caught a glimpse of something that made him do a double take. Was that metal? It looked almost like titanium or carbon fiber, with a distinctly non-human shape and texture, but it was only visible for a split second before Sarah's pant leg fell back into place. "Did you guys see?" Brad started to say, but Sarah had already moved on to the next stretch. "See what?" Jake asked, not really paying attention as he showed off his flexibility to some of the female gym members who had gathered to watch the spectacle. "Nothing, I guess," Brad muttered, but he kept staring at Sarah's legs, trying to get another glimpse of whatever he thought he'd seen. "All right, everyone ready?" Sarah called out, walking to the starting line. 3 miles, 1 loop around the neighborhood course. First one back to this spot wins. The group lined up with Jake, Mike, and Brad positioning themselves directly next to Sarah. They wanted front row seats to her humiliation. "On your mark, get set." Sarah raised her hand. "Go!" The start was explosive. Jake, Mike, and Brad shot forward like they were running a 100-meter sprint, their competitive instincts taking over. The rest of the group followed at various paces, with Sarah appearing to struggle at the back of the pack. "Good luck, Sarah," Jake called over his shoulder with mock encouragement. "Try to keep up." By the end of the first mile, the 3 leaders had opened up a significant gap. Sarah was running alone, well behind the main group, her limp more pronounced than ever. Several gym members who had gathered to watch were already shaking their heads in sympathy. "This is painful to watch," one of them commented. "Someone should probably call this off." But Sarah kept running, her face showing no signs of distress despite her apparent struggle. If anything, she looked focused, intensely, almost supernaturally focused. The second mile brought more of the same. Jake, Mike, and Brad were running together, trash-talking and enjoying what they assumed was an easy victory. "I almost feel bad," Mike panted. "This is like racing against a wounded deer." "Don't feel bad," Brad replied. "She asked for this. Sometimes people need to learn their limitations the hard way." But as they entered the third and final mile, something strange began to happen. Sarah's running form was changing. The limp that had been so pronounced was becoming less noticeable. Her stride was lengthening, becoming more fluid and powerful. Most remarkably, she didn't seem to be breathing hard at all. "Is it just me?" Jake asked, glancing back. "Or is she getting faster?" Mike looked over his shoulder and felt a chill run down his spine. Sarah had closed the gap significantly and was now running with a form that looked almost professional. That's impossible. She was limping badly just a mile ago. By the final half mile, Sarah had caught up to the main group and was steadily working her way forward. Her face showed no signs of fatigue, while Jake, Mike, and Brad were all breathing heavily and starting to feel the pace. "How is this possible?" Brad gasped, watching in disbelief as Sarah pulled alongside them. As they approached the final quarter mile, Sarah was not just keeping pace, she was starting to pull ahead. The woman who had been limping and struggling just 20 minutes earlier was now running like a machine, her form perfect, her breathing controlled, her pace relentless. The finish line was in sight, and Sarah was in the lead. With 500 yards remaining to the finish line, something unexpected happened. Sarah, who had been steadily pulling away from the pack and was clearly going to win the race, suddenly slowed to a stop. The entire group, breathing heavily and sweating profusely, caught up to her in confusion. Jake bent over, hands on his knees, gasping for air. What are you doing? Why did you stop? You were about to win!" Mike wiped sweat from his forehead, equally bewildered. "Are you okay? Did you pull something?" Sarah stood perfectly still, her breathing remarkably controlled for someone who had just run nearly 3 miles. She looked at each of them in turn, her expression serious and contemplative. I stopped because there's something I need to show you, something I should have shown you from the beginning. Brad, still trying to catch his breath, looked annoyed. Show us what? Can we finish this race first? I mean, you were actually going to win, which is... Honestly, I don't even understand how that's possible. That's exactly what I need to explain, Sarah said quietly. She reached down and, without hesitation, began rolling up both legs of her track pants. The entire group fell silent. What they saw defied everything they thought they knew about their coach. Sarah's left leg, from just below the knee down, was not flesh and bone. It was a sophisticated piece of engineering, carbon fiber, titanium, and advanced polymers crafted into what was clearly a high-performance prosthetic limb. But this wasn't a medical device designed just for walking. This was a blade, the kind worn by elite Paralympic sprinters, designed for speed and efficiency. "Oh my God," whispered someone from the back of the group. Jake's mouth fell open. Mike took an involuntary step backward. Brad just stared, his brain struggling to process what he was seeing. Sarah's voice was steady, but there was emotion underneath it. 3 years ago, I was deployed in Afghanistan with the United States Marine Corps. I was a sergeant with the 2nd Battalion, 7th Marines. On September 15th, 2021, during the evacuation of Kabul, my squad was conducting a humanitarian mission in a civilian area when an improvised explosive device detonated directly beneath our vehicle. The silence was absolute. Even the California traffic seemed to fade into the background. The explosion killed 3 of my Marines instantly. Lance Corporal Rodriguez, who was 19 years old and had just gotten engaged. Corporal Williams, who had a 2-year-old daughter he'd never met. And Private First Class Chen, no relation, just shared a name, who was planning to become a teacher when he got home. Sarah's voice cracked slightly, but she continued. I was the lucky one. I only lost my leg. Tears were forming in several people's eyes. Jake felt like he was going to be sick, but not from the run. I spent 8 months at Walter Reed Medical Center. The doctors were amazing, but they were also realistic. You'll walk again, they told me. You might even jog a little. But competitive running, that part of your life is over. She looked down at her prosthetic, then back at the group. I told them they were wrong, not out of disrespect, but because I knew something they didn't. I knew that my Marines didn't die so I could give up. They died believing in something bigger than themselves, and I wasn't going to dishonor that by accepting limitations. Mike was openly crying now. Sarah, we had no idea. The rehabilitation was hell, Sarah continued, learning to walk again, then learning to run. This prosthetic cost more than most people's cars. It's made from the same carbon fiber they use in Formula One race cars. Every step had to be relearned, every movement recalibrated. She paused, looking at each of them. 2 years after the explosion, I made the United States Paralympic team. Last year, I competed in the Tokyo Paralympics in the 1,500-meter race. I didn't just compete, I won a bronze medal. The revelation hit them like a physical blow. Jake sat down hard on the pavement. You're a Paralympic medalist? I am. And when I stepped onto that track in Tokyo with 80,000 people watching and millions more around the world, I carried the memory of Rodriguez, Williams, and Chen with me. I ran for them. I ran for every person who's ever been told they can't do something. And I ran for myself, not the person I used to be, but the person I chose to become. Brad's voice was barely a whisper. And now you're here, teaching us. Sarah smiled for the first time since the revelation. I retired from competition 6 months ago. Not because I couldn't keep going, but because I found something more important than winning races. I found that I could help other people discover what they're really capable of. She gestured toward the finish line, still 500 yards away. I stopped this race not because I couldn't win it. I was going to win it easily. I stopped because winning wasn't the point. The point was showing you that everything you think you know about strength, about capability, about what's possible, you might want to reconsider. The group stood in stunned silence, processing not just what they had learned, but what it meant about their own assumptions, their own limitations, and their own behavior. So, Sarah said, her voice gentle but firm, shall we finish this run together? Not as a competition, but as a team. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Then Jake, the cocky bodybuilder who had been so dismissive just an hour earlier, stepped forward. His face was streaked with tears and his voice shook as he spoke. "Sarah, Jesus Christ, we are such assholes." He ran his hands through his hair, looking absolutely devastated. "I mean, what we said to you, how we treated you. You're a goddamn war hero. You're a Paralympic medalist. You've overcome more in 3 years than most people face in a lifetime. And we mocked you for limping." He fell to his knees on the asphalt, overwhelmed by shame. "My grandfather fought in Vietnam. He always told me that freedom isn't free, that people like you pay the price so people like me can live our comfortable lives. And what did I do when I met one of those heroes? I insulted you. I questioned your qualifications. I treated you like you were beneath me." Mike stepped forward, his massive frame shaking with emotion. "Sarah, I have a son in the Army. He's deployed right now, somewhere I can't even know about. Every night I pray that if something happens to him, there are people like you watching his back. And here you are, standing in front of me, and instead of thanking you for your service, instead of recognizing your sacrifice, I made fun of you." His voice broke completely. "You lost your leg serving our country. You lost your brothers in arms, and then you came back and became a world-class athlete despite everything. And my first instinct was to tear you down because I was too stupid and too arrogant to see past my own prejudices." Brad was the last to speak, and when he did, his voice was barely audible. "I don't even know what to say. I've spent my whole life thinking I was tough because I could do a hard workout or lift heavy weights. But you faced real adversity. You've overcome real challenges. You've achieved things that most people can't even imagine." He looked down at his hands. "I made fun of your limp. Your limp. The limp you have because you were willing to put your life on the line for people you'd never met, including me, including all of us." The rest of the group had gathered around, and several others were crying openly. One woman spoke up. "Sarah, we all participated in this. We all stood by and let it happen. We're all responsible." Sarah looked around at the circle of faces that had been skeptical and dismissive an hour ago, now filled with genuine remorse and newfound respect. She felt a familiar tightness in her chest, the same feeling she'd had when she first stood on the Paralympic podium. "Listen to me, all of you," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had faced real adversity and emerged stronger. "You don't need to apologize for not knowing my story. Everyone has a story, and we can't know them all. What matters is how we respond when we learn something new." She gestured for Jake to stand up. "The fact that you're feeling this way right now tells me everything I need to know about who you really are. You're not bad people. You're human beings who made assumptions based on incomplete information. We all do that." Mike wiped his eyes. "But how can you forgive us so easily? After what we said?" Sarah's smile was genuine and warm. "Because 3 years ago I learned something more valuable than any medal or record. I learned that holding on to anger and resentment only hurts yourself. My Marines didn't die so I could spend my life bitter about people's ignorance. They died believing in the possibility of a better world, and that means giving people the chance to be better." She looked toward the finish line. "Besides, you've already learned the most important lesson I could teach you. You've learned that strength comes in forms you might not recognize. That capability isn't always visible from the outside. That the person you underestimate might be the person who surprises you most." Brad spoke up hesitantly. Will you still coach us, after how we treated you?" "Of course I will. But understand this. I'm not going to just teach you about running technique or training schedules. I'm going to teach you about pushing past the barriers in your mind, about finding strength you didn't know you had, about the difference between being tough and being strong." She touched her prosthetic leg. "Sometimes what we lose becomes the source of our greatest power. Sometimes our biggest setbacks become our greatest comebacks. And sometimes the thing that makes us different is exactly what makes us extraordinary." Jake found his voice again. "What do you want from us? How can we make this right?" "Finish this run with me, not as a competition, but as a team. and then commit to being the kind of people who see potential instead of limitations, who ask questions instead of making assumptions, who lift others up instead of tearing them down. The group formed a loose circle around Sarah as they began jogging toward the finish line. The pace was easy, conversational, completely different from the aggressive sprint they had started with. "Can I ask you something?" Mike said as they ran. "What was it like, competing in the Paralympics?" Sarah's face lit up. Terrifying and amazing. When I lined up for that 1,500-meter final, I thought about Rodriguez, Williams, and Chen. I thought about every person who told me I'd never run competitively again. I thought about every moment of pain and doubt and struggle. And then the gun went off, and none of that mattered anymore. There was just the track and the race and the knowledge that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. As they crossed the finish line together, the group spontaneously broke into applause, not for any winner, because there wasn't one, but for the journey they had just shared. "So what now?" Brad asked. Sarah grinned. "Now we get to work, because I'm going to teach you how to run faster than you ever thought possible. But more importantly, I'm going to teach you how to become stronger than you ever imagined. And it starts with understanding that real strength isn't about what you can do with a perfect body. It's about what you can accomplish with whatever body you have." The story ended there, but it also began there. Because sometimes the most powerful lessons come from the most unexpected teachers. Sometimes the strongest people are those who appear most vulnerable, and sometimes a prosthetic leg isn't a sign of weakness, it's a symbol of unbreakable will. The people who underestimate you are often fighting their own insecurities and fears. Forgiving them doesn't excuse their behavior, it frees you from carrying their limitations. Remember, every time you fall, you have the choice to get back up. Every setback can become a comeback, and every difference can become a strength. The only real disability is a closed mind, and the only real limitation is the one you accept.